Father Peterson made a comment about the lack of rubrics in the LSB. The LSB actually follows a rich tradition of rubrical impoverishment, which is certainly present in LW and worse, the TLH. The student of Holy Liturgy that looks at the history of the liturgy finds that beginning with the Blessed Reformer, when he takes a machete to the divine service and creates the Formula Missae in 1523. It is almost absent rubric. But there is a zeitgeist in the early Reformation among the real Lutheran churches. It's actually before Genesiolutherans, but when there were real Lutheran churches, and that is, we retain everything, rubric, ceremony, etc., that isn't excised by the Blessed Reformer. So Luther writes in 1523, here we retain what we've always done. Here we do what we've always done. We retain these because our fathers in the faith gave them to us. And in 1526, with the Deutsche Messe, which is actually liturgically very difficult to defend, theologically difficult to defend, Luther reorders the ordinaries, takes out scripture and applies paraphrases. So the LSB is not unique in that, although the LSB does that as well. In 1540, the Saxon Agenda is published, and Luther's alive in Saxony, and this stays in place for many, many years among the Lutherans. And a short study of the Saxon Agenda, well, we might say it renders itself a nothing burger. There's almost nothing in it. It's devoid of rubric. It's devoid of any explanation. Nobody knows from this agenda where to stand, how to turn. Lutherans put no premium on this, and that continues throughout. Take a look at ELHB and try to find good rubrics in ELHB. So this is a rich tradition. Against that tradition stand men like Leia and Lochner. And I'm going to focus on a book that is not mine, and we have the translator here with us today. He's going to join me near the end of the presentation, but whenever you're comfortable, Mr. Carver. And Leia and Lochner are very interested in the historic liturgy. Leia writes in the introduction to his agenda, he has a church agenda, that he studied 200 what they call ancient church agendas to come up with his rubrics. He publishes a daily sanctoral calendar. Now, these are 19th century Lutherans, and when we think about that, we think about Geneva gowns and preaching tabs and black paraments and red paraments alone, which is many of our Lutheran churches, just they would switch back and forth. Well, then comes Leia and Lochner in what amounts to liturgical renewal. I have 3 books that I'm going to reference. The book at hand is Liturgical Forms. It's kind of like the impossible to get occasional services, right? We have this title from the 50s, I think, called Occasional Services. And nobody can get this thing, and everybody wants it. And it's got all this stuff in it that we don't have. So this is what Lochner did, and he'll explain that to you in a moment in his own words. We have Hauptgottesdienst by Lochner, and this is also translated by Matthew Carver and others. And this is his chief divine service, and it is richer in rubrics than any of our rubrical manuals. It's a remarkable work. And then lastly, because it will be referred to, the Walther Hymnal, which is the creation and child of Mr. Carver again, which intersects with the history of Zion on a hymn that our church was embarrassed to sing, "Oh, how blessed," because our church didn't believe that the saints in heaven could sing back. So they went through and took out every other stanza where the saints were singing back to the church. So the church sings, "Oh, how blessed are ye whose toils are ended," and heaven is silent. But in the original, heaven sang back. And Matthew Carver returned those verses through the translation of Father Runge, who was a pastor here. So I'd like to talk a little bit about liturgical forms. I wear trifold. I'd like to talk about liturgical forms. And this is Friedrich Lochner. And there's a little bit about his Hofgottesdienst title. These are in your packet, by the way. The slides are. And there's a place for you to make crude comment. And provides historical introductions to each ordinary and proper. I mean, this is a 19th century guy. This is amazing. And there is the bibliographic citation. So let's let Lochner tell us. It is well known that in recent times, and above all in the old country, very great interest has been taken in the liturgy of the early Lutherans and the early church, and thus of early church music. Liturgical study is pursued ardently, and treasure after treasure is put on display. Everywhere there is an endeavor to cultivate divine services, once more in their ancient and beautiful form, to turn attention again to the churchly customs and usages with respect to altar hangings, ringing of prayer bells, and the like. So strong is this liturgical current among those who are of a mind to return to authentic Lutheranism that it asserts itself here in this country. Even the General Synod, which has obviously abandoned Lutheranism since 1845, nevertheless always desiring to be called Lutheran, cannot evade it. But the important thing about this quote is the reverence and the joy that Lochner takes in finding historic liturgical practices and bringing them back for use. Here are some, here's the short bibliographic citation. And then these are the books that are included in this volume. Liturgical forms, several rites and ceremonies with prayers, feasts and usages of Lutheran and Catholic churches. This is a remarkable document. The reverence with which Lochner discusses Roman Catholic practice, right? I mean, you think about 19th century Lutheranism, they're throwing stones at the Roman Catholics. And Lochner unpacks this very reverently, and he gives good explanations to each part. Here we have the liturgy for the children's divine service. Many of that we have those in our parishes now. I used it at Zion Cleghorn in North Wisconsin for 5 years, and that came from a previous pastor at this congregation. Mr. Carver has rendered a new translation. And then ultimately, liturgy for the good service, divine service on Good Friday is included. Leia and Lochner are connected in big ways. You see that Leia, born in 1808, dies in 1872, only 64 years old. Lochner is born 14 years after that, but he lives 30 years longer. And early on, Lochner studied drawing, engraving, music. Leia advised Lochner to study for the ministry at the preparatory school in Nuremberg. He attended seminary at Schwabach and Neuendelstau, where he studied liturgical singing under Hummel. Came to America in 1845, and this is a remarkable chain here. Served as pastor of Salem United Lutheran and Reformed Congregation, right? They leave Germany to get away from the Reformed, and they get here, and the congregations are together. So for a year, he worked to encourage the congregation to constitute itself as a Lutheran congregation, and then left. He served congregations in Madison and Macoupin counties in Illinois from 1846 to 1850, Milwaukee for 26 years. He served as pastor of Springfield, Illinois, and instructor at Concordia Seminary. And that's 11 years. He became the pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church of Milwaukee, 1889, establishing a teacher school, which later moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana, then to Addison, Illinois, and lastly to River Forest. He retired to Milwaukee, served as assistant pastor of Trinity until his death. And I'd like to thank Dr. Cameron McKenzie of the CTS Seminary. He has a wonderful article that goes through the life of Lochner, and it's really worth reading. And I give you a bibliographic citation there. It's in like 4-point font on your copy. But from the author's preface, since the older Lutheran agendas, and thus the church agenda of St. Louis, oh, I forgot the St. Louis agenda, that kind of follows in that tradition, drawn from them, contains no forms for a great number of churchly rites and ceremonies which appear in this country and in the life of the free church. I was in due time asked by both by certain well-known pastoral conferences, as well as by individual brothers in the ministry, to publish the pertinent forms. Those of us who serve goddess needs as our masthead are approached all year long with liturgical questions. They come from all over the United States and Canada, and in my case, quite a bit from South America and the Caribbean. And that is still going on. There's a hunger for the knowledge of the divine service. To this end, from July 84, February 86, I published 20 volumes of Liturgical Monthly, and chose this path not only out of financial consideration, but also because it seemed to me the best suited to fulfill further wishes which might be expressed in the meantime. In addition to the requested forms, I also included a number of items from the old agendas, rituals, and church orders, since these writings could not be found in the hands of many brethren in the ministry. And one of the benefits of Matthew Carver's tome is that he actually goes back and provides some primary sources and bibliographic references to these works. 3 basic sections: liturgical rites, prayers, and collects. The last section, the appendices on the divine service and Christian decorum, shorter liturgical works, and a catechism prayers from the St. Louis agenda, which are also available in the St. Louis agenda, but now you can get them in English in this volume. In the liturgical rites, he provides consecrations, ordination, installation, baptism, marriage, communion of the sick, at the deathbed, burial, reception into membership, announcements from the pulpit in cases of church discipline, private confession with vespers, brief form and manner of prayer for the instruction of confirmands. This is 19th century Lutheranism. I mean, this is amazingly thorough. Prayers and collects, he provides 35. The appendix that I'm really most enamored of, the few remarks on the chief divine service, and then also various items like how to make the sign of the cross, Latin names for the Sundays, liturgical colors, what do you do with a baptismal gown, how do you use a baptismal font, transition from the general prayer of the church to the Lord's Prayer. In Lochner's setting of the divine service, the Lord's Prayer precedes the preface. On decorum, I have a little quote from that. What after communion, the observance of good external discipline in the Holy Supper. These are worthy for our time as well. Shorter liturgical works, feasts and usages of the Lutheran and Catholic churches. I mentioned that before. He explains and then compares and contrasts. Liturgy for the a Christmas for children, divine service, and then the catechism, prayers. So, Lochner, quoting Luther's introduction to the Formula Missae, 1523, we confess that we never intended to abolish all outward divine service, but to purge again that which has hitherto been in use and is spoiled with many accretions. This is Luther. Thus, now this is Lochner. Thus, in reforming the divine service, Luther did not throw out the baby with the bathwater. He did not proceed radically, like the enthusiasts, but conservatively. I have a lot of trouble saying that what Luther did in 1523 is conservative, but he does retain the basic structure of the Mass, and he takes out the center, the canon, because of the obvious heresies and theological problems with it. But in 1526, he put some stuff back in that includes an anamnesis, an epiclesis, and some other things just reworded. He also sought here to keep firm and develop its connection to the ancient church. Whatever was of the ancient church, whatever was pure, whatever was in accord with the gospel, whatever served the word and sacraments, he retained. The Lutheran chief divine service is the purified Mass, the purified chief divine service of the ancient church. And Luther himself makes statements just like this, that he reaches back, and this is what we do because the apostles did it. It therefore becomes clear from closer examination of the chief divine service, according to its constituent parts, that it is by no means an accidental conglomeration or heap, but a well-constructed whole, progressing by degrees toward the proclamation of the word, and from this striving toward the sealing of the word to the supper as its goal, the Holy Eucharist as the center of the divine service. Lochner then proceeds to discuss each part of the Mass, demonstrating how every part relates to the others. Now here's Lochner talking about Roman Catholic ritual. Because the Mass is to be simultaneously a symbolic representation of the sufferings of Christ, the actions of the priest in every part of his ministration must refer to the particular circumstances of the Passion, in which even the various positions and movements have their peculiar significance. 19th century Lutheran studying the rite and the rubric, the ceremony of the extraordinary form. After his section providing Latin names for the Sundays, which we are still doing, by the way, Zion is a Lutheran hymnal congregation, and we still catechize on Sunday mornings at Bible class about what the Latin names mean for the Sundays. Lochner turns then to the question of liturgical colors. I just put this in to make a couple of our guys mad. These colors in the paraments for the pulpit and altar were from ancient time, violent in Advent and in Lent, Lent from Septuagesima on. That should answer all the questions. White on Christmas to the Epiphany, inclusive, on Easter and also on the purification, Annunciation, and visitation of Mary. I mean, this is remarkable for a 19th century Lutheran, right? Green and Epiphany tide up to Septuagesima, not including Septuagesima, as well as throughout Trinity tide. Red on Whitsunday, Holy Trinity, the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, and Feasts of the Apostles. Black on Good Friday, Days of Repentance, and morning services. Zion's funeral paraments are black, and our pall is black. Wherever possible, colors were changed in the Lutheran Church as well, at least between black and red, or another color. I love it when I can research some historic guy that does the same thing we do and use it. Now, this is Lochner commenting on poorly conducted liturgy. When the liturgist runs from the side up to the steps of the altar, turns so quickly that his vestments fly out, does not keep the center of the altar, gesticulates with the book toward the altar, or even more commonly toward the congregation during the liturgy, and gives such little evidence of a liturgist's self-negation that it rather seems as if, even at the altar, his own person is supposed to be the main subject. This liturgist self-negation, that's worthy of a whole paper. Also, when he leans with his back comfortably against the altar, when he performs the consecration in the supper, or the laying on of hands with fingers spread apart, like that. Everything in practice, this is Lochner, is to be seen and heard. When you get to this page, I commend to you Matthew Carver's rendering. He went back and found where this quote was taken from. He renders the whole section, and it's a very worthy read. All communicants in the external discipline, all communicants shall come to the Lord's table with due reverence, devotion, discipline, and humility, without any attention to the precedence of rank, and shall, by their clothing, gestures, and all things, so behave that no frivolity pomposity, or arrogance may be detected in them, but rather the true Christian adornment, which consists not of plaiting of the hair, wearing of gold, or of putting on of such apparel, but the true adornment is the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, which is pure and genuine in faith, with meekness and quiet prayer. Okay, in particular, as females should not be uncovered at all other times, so also in particularly when receiving the Holy Supper and at communion, they are to eschew all garments which cause hindrance in the distribution or otherwise give offense. Moreover, where it has been customary concerning the order of communicants for men and young men to approach first, then young women with the wives and the mothers, this is to remain intact and to be retained. And in the case in the front of Zion's narthex, you'll see a silver chalice marked F for the women and a silver chalice marked M for the men. Finally, preachers are, among other things, to remind and exhort the people in their sermons that when communicants are present and the service is being celebrated, they are to remain in the church and wait till the benediction has been spoken, and so call diligently upon God that he would always gather for himself a church among us and mercifully preserve his word and the right use of the sacraments among us and our descendants. So this is from Lochner's foreword. Their remains of this monthly journal were sold some time ago, yet since inquiries continue to be made about it, and I have been encouraged by the favorable reception encountered by the monthly liturgical writing, the appreciative correspondence made to me in the course of time, I decided upon a new edition under the title given above, Liturgical Forms, with the sole exclusion of a form for a special service of lessons. We call that lessons and carols or something like that. The complete collection of forms appears here, those of similar nature being grouped together. That form, a service of lessons, is omitted because there is proved to be very little need for such a rite. In its place, prayers, collects, and appendix have been somewhat expanded. May it please the Lord to let this little writing provide continued assistance until a greater shall render it unnecessary. And we find this writing still necessary. So I welcome Matthew Carver to come forward. He is to be credited with this book, and he is going to talk for 5-7 minutes, and we welcome him to tell us about the process and also anything you'd like to correct.
Thank you. So I began work on Lochner's Liturgische Formulare, in its German title, Liturgische Formulare, which we could say liturgical formularies or liturgical forms, but liturgical forms fits better on the book and is easier to say, so we went with that. Almost a decade ago, about 2014, I had just finished the first 2/3 of translating the Hauptgottesdienst, the Chief Divine Service, in which I was collaborating with Reverend David Jewell. He eventually withdrew from that project, and so I completed it, but I had already started dabbling on the translation for Liturgische Formulare and investigating its relationship with the later English agenda of 1918, 1921, and its effects on that. And we can see some additions which were made to the agenda from its transition from German to English, which may have been influenced by Lochner's work. So at the time, it was a speculative project that I thought would be self-published sometime down the road. And so after I completed the Hauptgottesdienst, I had set the Liturgische Formulare aside in order to pursue some other contracts. And I only remembered it later when I was in Baltimore for the St. Mark's Conference in 2019, and I came across a little book by Lochner called Feste und Gebräuche, this Feasts and Usages of the Lutheran and Catholic churches. And he had it on loan from Fort Wayne, actually, at the time. So I photographed it and thought that might be useful. And eventually it worked into a larger work of the book became not just liturgical forms, but Lochner's other liturgical works, because Hauptgottesdienst was coming out 2017 or 20. Actually, it took much longer. But after John Wieker became involved, was instrumental in getting Hauptgottesdienst to come out, then I was able to devote attention to the Liturgische Formulare, and in its new form, it had mutated into this larger collection of liturgical works. So then I began searching for more to make sure I could get as many into one volume as possible. And so that's when I came across the, I remembered that there was this Christmas program which had been adapted and revised for modern use, and I think is used at Redeemer Evangelical-Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne. Is that correct? Yeah. And so I thought a version which showed people the original form and the original hymns would be of interest, if not as practical. And in that searching, I also came across Lochner's Good Friday liturgy, which is very similar in a lot of ways to the Chief Divine Service and to a sort of Passion, Traore, Bach kind of service combined. So it's got elements of all those things, and readings and chorale stanzas. And so that was fun to work on as well, and to see just from a historical perspective how much he was introducing, like the improperia or the reproaches are in there. So with these and the Feste und Gebräuche, which I eventually discovered was the most curious volume because it's very, very short, and it was apparently printed in 1897, so the last of his books. And it seems like it was almost incomplete at the time, and was published for the bookstore, the Milwaukee, I think it's Wells, might be Northwestern now. So what the origin of that is, as he says in the introduction to that, the Feasts and Usages, is a book by a guy named Carver, which he came upon in Germany. And that one was originally titled Feasts and Usages of Protestant and Catholic churches. So he makes that distinction. So he adapted Carver's work and makes it fit for Lutherans, to educate Lutherans about these differences. And he adds notes about the more recent, at the time, events surrounding the dogma of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. So there's some it's interesting notes, and I add some footnotes there too. It's interesting to note those differences, and what he thought was important to educate Lutherans about. And then there's a list of liturgical concepts and furnishings at the end, to familiarize Lutherans with what Catholics were doing and what, in some cases, what was wrong with it. And he adds his own section there, an expanded section on the litany, I believe. But anyways, it's definitely becomes sort of his own work. And so it was that was informative as well. And unfortunately, I didn't find, as a postscript, I found one more work after this was published, the Kleine Psalterium, or Small Psalter, which it does fall into the category of liturgical work, where he has several other non-liturgical works. He has homiletical works, specifically the epistle Predigten, so sermons on the epistles of the church year, which might have been used. They often preached on the epistles in the afternoon service or the catechism service. So whatever the use for that was. He also had devotional works for Easter called the Osterbuch, and the Passion or Lenten Tide or Passion Tide called the Passionsbuch. And I have been working on those, and I think those are both those are taken from earlier writers, Orthodox writers, and he adapted them for his own use in the home and in his parishes. And so besides those, there is this other liturgical work. But I think it's interesting because it shows that he was working on reintroducing Gregorian chant, the psalms chanted at antiphonally between the congregation and the cantor or the pastor, or two choirs somehow formed. And he uses Gregorian tones, although he only uses about 4 or 5. And he includes 15 psalms with Gloria Patris, and the opening versicles as well, with a Gloria Patri for opening a service. And he also includes the Magnificat in the tonus peregrinus, or the tone 9, which Luther also used. And these are all harmonized Gregorian tones. And so I'll be working on that and then publish that as a separate piece. I don't know if it'll be included in a future edition of Liturgical Forms, but I think that concludes the work, and I look forward to working on the devotional works too, and hopefully bringing those up.
Good. Thank you to Matthew Carver.